Well, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, we've got a lot going on nowadays, Martin. Lots of stuff to talk about for sure. But before we get started, I'd like for you to introduce yourself. Who is Martin Armstrong? For the one or two people who may not know who you are, I know you're very much renowned, but for the two or three out there, who is Martin Armstrong?
I would say that I basically kind of ended up in this field of government advisor and geopolitical analyst and stuff, kind of haphazardly. We were probably the largest, we were basically the largest forecaster in foreign exchange. And back in 85, we were going to open up an office in Geneva. And one of our clients is one of the big three banks there. And we went to lunch and I gave him a list of European names because I knew there was anti-Americanism there. And I said, which one do you think we should use? And he asked me, he says, well, name one European analyst. And I couldn't at the time. I was embarrassed. I said, I'm sure there are. I just don't know of any. And he laughed and he says, there are none. He says, you don't realize why everybody uses you. And I said, no. And he said, because you don't care if the dollar goes up or down. I said, it's just a trade, and he explained to me after World War II, the politicians used the currency as a validity of their accomplishments. Say the Deutschmark's up 10% against the dollar, so that proves I did a good job. Whereas in the United States, no president could ever say, vote for me because the dollar's up against the Mexican peso, They would have been laughed off the stage. So it was really the currency that ended up, I would say, bringing us into more central banks and governments and stuff because it became very political. So I helped, like Margaret Thatcher, keep the pound out of the euro. And just about every financial crisis I've been called into is that they began to understand. I was back in 1985. I was called in when they were forming the G5, and they were going to say they were going to lower the value of the dollar by 40% so they could sell more American products overseas, make them cheaper. And I warned them they're going to cause a crash. And, I said, I'll give it maybe 2 years. And they just don't understand international finance. Because you just sold a third of the national debt to Japan. And now you're saying you're going to lower the dollar by 40%, they're going to sell. Well, why? Because they're going to lose money. So I wrote to Reagan and I said, this is crazy. And then when the 87 crash came, I practically got drafted to go into it. I didn't want to get involved. But it's, my biggest accomplishment with that, if you read the presidential report, the Brady Commission report at the end, all they basically said is, well, we think foreign exchange had something to do with it. They'll never blame themselves, ever. But at least I got them not to, go after everybody in the private sector, but, so I've just been dragged into all these things over the years, mainly I think because of currency, and that's where it all kind of came from, that we were, currency just started trading, in 1972. I had a friend who was, an executive VP at Franklin National Bank at the time, who was the founder of MasterCard. All right, and that was the first bank to fail under a floating exchange rate system after Bretton Woods collapsed. And there was nobody. He called me, he says, look, you know about this stuff, would you come take a look at it? And they lost about 10% of their capital on the Italian lira. So after that, just about every crisis, they get the guy that did that one, So it's been an interesting career. When China got, communism fell, I was the one called in by the central bank over there to help them become capitalist. Just about every, like I said, when they were forming the euro that came to us. I mean, it was just, we just happened to be the experts in foreign exchange globally.
Yeah, which is very apropos to having you on right now, given what's going on with the yen and the Japanese market, now the American markets as well. You do have this yen carry trade ongoing at the time of this recording, which has precipitated a pretty tumultuous drop in the markets right now. I kind of want to get your take there. What do you see kind of transpiring on that front?
Japan is probably the one country with the highest level of public confidence that ever existed, mainly because they had believed that the emperor was God. And that belief seemed to have been transferred from the emperor to the government. So the real shocker, I think, in Japan is largely you have to look at this from a standpoint that people became complacent. It was very cheap. They kept, low interest rates. And, they basically ran their course. So you're looking at risks over there in Japan. I mean, I hear from clients that we have there, they're worried about North Korea shooting off missiles over Japan, etc. And they're beginning to say, gee, maybe I should have some money someplace else. So there's a lot of geopolitical behind the carry trade as well. But a lot of these people, they were just simply borrowing in yen because it was cheap and then investing elsewhere. And then these types of moves have been historically what we end up getting called in on. Like when the Swiss euro peg broke. I mean, so many people lost 20-25% on the mortgages because the bankers sold them effectively, cheap Swiss loans here. And when they did that, and then the foreign exchange moves, and then they lose the house. It's same thing happened in Australia in the 80s. Everybody was borrowing in Swiss to save interest rates, and then, the currency flipped. It's always the same story. And I think it's maybe unprofessional people that do this. I'll give you an example. I mean, I was an advisor to Temple University. And back then, with the whole Orange County collapse and stuff, you had people from Merrill Lynch running around showing people, oh, here's the way to increase your interest. And they were basically leveraging 30-year bonds and 10-year bonds and then shorting one against the other and taking the difference and say, see, we can double your interest. And they were going around, they blew up Orange County in California, which went bankrupt on it, a number of companies. And Temple University told them to, that they had to come pitch it to me. When I looked at this, I said, guys, if interest rates just take 0.25% up, you're out of the game. Oh, that's not going to happen, whatever. I said, I'm sorry, I cannot advise Temple University and their trust funds on this. And they went back to the chairman, who was Dick Fox, and they said, oh, he's just too old. He doesn't know the new way to make money. And Dick was maybe 10 years older than me. He says, well, if he's old, I'm ancient. But you get these young guys often, and they look at maybe a trend for 3 or 4 months and say, oh, that's it. We can become really rich. And this is what leads to these dramatic moves all the time, because they sell this stuff as if it's, from heaven, the secret to make all the money you want.
Yeah. So, do you see this as a long-standing sell-off, or is this more of a short-term thing, just as we kind of figure out what's going on with the yen and so forth?
No, I mean, basically, you're looking at this thing really from a standpoint of 2024 should have been a major turning point for it. As geopolitical events happen, a lot of people don't realize, but it all comes down to capital flows. The United States was an agrarian society back at the late 1800s. J.P. Morgan had to bail out the country from bankruptcy in 1896, lending $100 million in gold. And then it was after World War I, the U.S. had replaced Britain as the financial capital. By World War II, we ended up with 76% of the official world gold reserves. So effectively, what you're looking at is U.S. would still be agrarian in theory if there wasn't for World War I and II. The capital then leaves there and comes here. You're obviously not going to keep your money in the bank when you got tanks running down the street blowing things up, you know. And the same thing is in Japan. They're very concerned about North Korea and that the prospects of North Korea attacking the South and Japan are rising all the time. And so you're going to be looking at capital flows out of that region to the dollar again. And, you know, they buy tangible assets, things of this nature, in part. You know, I know they've been calling this, the bubble of everything. That's because they're buying real estate. You know, not everybody's, you know, doing the same thing. So you have, I mean, I'm down in Florida and I still get 2-3 calls a week. Gee, you want to sell your house? You know, no, thank you. And realtors I know say that houses that are $1 to $5 million down here, they're selling for cash. So people are just trying to get their money out of the bank and just put it someplace. So it's not even mortgages or interest rate. You know, those things are, you know, maybe for the smaller mom and pop things, but the high end seems to be just capital flight at this point.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of calls for, you know, emergency rate cuts and all this stuff, given, you know, some of the market sell-off happening here. But, you know, doesn't this kind of play into the Fed, though? Like, you know, the market has been heating up for quite some time now. I mean, this actually helps the Fed, doesn't it, by cooling it off a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see this as, you know, becoming a major bear market. Most of these people compare this to like the Great Depression. And they're saying, oh, it's going to be the great crash. Look at this. Okay, fine, but they don't really understand anything of the background. In 1929, we had a balanced budget. It was Europe that all defaulted on its debt, most of Asia in 1931. I suggest you read Herbert Hoover's memoirs on the chapter 1931. It will, you know, he said capital acted like a loose cannon on the deck of a ship in the middle of a hurricane. It was shooting off in every which direction so fast it couldn't form a committee to figure out what was going on. And that's what drove the dollar up, because all the capital came here. All right. As that happened, that's what forced FDR to confiscate gold in 34, to devalue the dollar because it had gone up so high. So people that keep talking about this is the crash of the century or whatever, and pointing to 29, you know, it's apples and oranges here. U.S. had a balanced budget. That's why everybody was going to the dollar. Now, do you really want to sell all your stocks and everything and go buy government bonds today? You know, you got war. They're talking about war on all four fronts. I mean, come on, it's not the same thing. And so I think you're looking at short-term scare tactics. Yeah, the market's it should have been making the traditional seasonal correction, September or October. But then, you know, the bottom pickers will come in and figure out, hey, this is a buy. Because as you go into war, the U.S. stock market will rise because there's no, the amount of money in bonds versus equities is about 10 to 1. So you're not talking about a dramatic shift. I mean, if 10% of the people that have government bonds say that's enough, I'm moving to equities, that's a huge amount of money. So, you have to look a little bit behind the curtain to understand what's going on here today. Because it is, confusing, but, the facts don't meet what a lot of these people are talking about. The Fed, this call for the Fed to make an emergency cut. First of all, the interest rates peaked in 29. They went down all the way to 1932, and it didn't stop the market from declining. Cutting rates does not save the day. What it is, and what we've done in research on this, the stock market's never peaked with the same level of interest rates twice. Why? 1929 was the worst, and it was the lowest level of interest rates. The peak in interest rates was for the panic of 1899 at 200%. All right, so what's the difference? And the difference seems to be perception. If you think the market's going to, go up 20%, you'll pay 5, 10%. All right, if you don't think it's going to go up 1%, you're not going to pay 1. So it's really perception. What do you expect from the future? And when you're uncertain about the future, it doesn't matter what the interest rate is, you're not going to borrow. This is what the ECB has learned the hard way. They went negative and it still didn't work in 2014. I said, you have to give people the impression that they can make something in the future. If they don't have that perception, they're not going to buy no matter what.
Yeah, it's confidence, right? It's all confidence and psychology. That's the market.
Pretty much. I mean, I remember before, I said, okay, fine, when real estate was down, and I said, okay, fine, real estate will start ticking up with interest rates. They said, oh, how could you say that? Because people are not stupid. If the mortgage rate keeps going down month after month after month, you don't rush out to go get a mortgage. As soon as that mortgage rate ticks up, wait a minute, maybe it's going to cost me more next month. So now you do it. People are not that stupid. They're much more intuitive than some of these analysts out there, honestly.
Yeah, do you think this do you see the Fed opening the floodgates back to QE anytime soon at all? I mean, given the fact that they have, I think the CME Fed Watch still has a 50% rate cut probability at 100% almost. And much to your point, you look at what's going on here with the dollar and the yen. The dollar is actually losing in value relative to the yen. So, if they end up cutting rates with a falling dollar, I mean, that's a recipe for disaster, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, it's you definitely have to understand what's going on, and the Fed is aware. Last December, Powell came out and he said, this spending is unsustainable. Now, I've been dealing with central banks for a long time. The number one rule is you never criticize the administration. Mm-hmm. That was the first time Powell has come out and criticized the administration since 1951.
And the administration fired back at him too, along with the party, Elizabeth Warren and Biden, all of them.
Yeah, they don't, they only speak their own game anyhow. They want the lowest interest rates so they get votes, things like that. What about the country long term? They don't care. This is the problem with politics. It's just, they do anything just for a vote. And they don't care what the implications are long term. And Powell is very much aware of this. And you go into war, just look at the spending it was Vietnam that broke Bretton Woods. You fixed the dollar at $35, okay? but you didn't stop the quantity of money that you printed. I mean, I think a 3-year-old with a pocket calculator could figure out that system was doomed to break. But a politician only looks at their own self-interest. I mean, there's actually a proposal they submitted on the floor in the House to disband the Federal Reserve. Oh, that's really great. Now we want Janet Yellen to decide what interest rates should be in money. I don't think so. People have to stop blaming the Federal Reserve for everything and take a look at. I think the biggest problem we have is that before 1971, if you had a $100 e-bond and you went down to the bank and said, "Here, can I borrow even $25 against it?" The answer was no, because it was illegal to lend against government debt. That's where the theory was. It was less inflationary to borrow than to print, because they were, in theory, taking money out of the system. After 1971, it all flipped. You want to trade gold futures or whatever, you can put your money in T-bills and post that as collateral. All right, so these people that keep blaming the Fed should look, the rules changed. The vast majority of the money supply that's being created is debt, because it's all fungible. It's money that pays interest. That's it. And then, take a look at it. I mean, almost 70% of the interest that we have spent goes overseas. It doesn't even stimulate the domestic economy. And even worse than that, they never pay off anything. We're still paying interest on the debt that they raised for World War II.
Yeah.
I mean, think about that. I mean, they want to give $1 trillion to Ukraine. It's going to cost you $2 more trillion in interest over the next decade. There is no fiscal management. This is what Powell was talking about. This spending is unsustainable. Eventually, it does collapse.
When does it collapse, though? Like, what's the straw that finally breaks the camel's back? Because, if you would have told someone that we'd be $35 trillion in sovereign debt, 100+ trillion in unfunded liabilities, if you would have told someone 20 years ago all of this, they would have certainly thought, you would have collapsed sooner than that. But what's keeping the whole system up from falling?
As long as you can sell the new debt to pay off the old, you can keep kicking the can down the road.
I see.
This is the problem with these neocons. You have Blinken in there threatening China over Taiwan, etc. China dumped $53 billion in the first quarter. They're not going to buy U.S. debt anymore. Janet Yellen hopped on a plane, "Oh, please, and buy our debt." And they basically said, "Let me see here. You want me to buy $100 billion in your debt so you can buy missiles to shoot us? Am I an idiot or what?" So this is what, historically, as long as somebody continues to buy the new debt to pay off the old, it can keep going. It could be 100 trillion. The kicker is when you lose that confidence. And in this case, we rely a lot on foreigners buying U.S. debt. All the central banks use it for reserves, etc. Then you take the stupidity of putting the sanctions on Russia. All right. What that did was basically it divided the world economy. The BRICS is not about gold and all that stuff. The BRICS is about geopolitical. And suddenly you had a bunch of countries look at this and say, "Wait a minute. If I don't do what you tell me to do, you remove me also from SWIFT." So that's what the BRICS is really about. All right, this whole thing started actually with Christine Lagarde when she was at the IMF. She started going after the tax havens. "You will give us all the names who have accounts here, or we will remove you from SWIFT." She's the one that started this. Then when Russia went into Crimea in 2014, Obama went to SWIFT and said, we want them removed. SWIFT refused. They said, you're not going to turn this system into a political weapon. So what they do, they replaced the head of SWIFT in 2019. Now he does whatever he's told. Okay? So you have divided the world economy. All right? Globalism as we've known it is at an end. All right? So this is part of the problem. And so, your question, when will it end? We're in those end days. All right. Our computer's basically projecting it out to about 2032. And that's probably when we have a complete new monetary system, etc. That in part is what the digital currency stuff's about. I deal with governments, Asia, US, Europe. I would say on a consensus is that about 35% of the economy is underground and they don't get taxes. So it's like you hire that 16-year-old girl next door to watch the kids while you and your wife go out and you gave her $50. Oh my God. That's why we're in trouble. She didn't pay her taxes. It's that 16-year-old they got to go get, And you had like Janet Yellen coming out and saying, oh, we're after the real rich, so we're going to bring auditing on eBay down to $600. I don't think Elon Musk is selling a used bike on eBay for $600, They come up with these, excuses all the time. Oh, we're going after them. I was in Australia when they passed a luxury tax and had a great slogan. We're going to tax their Ferraris, their fur coats, and their French wines. I saw maybe 2 Ferraris in Sydney because they were already 100% taxed to get them in. Fur coats maybe down in Melbourne, not in Sydney. And nobody ever gave me a French wine because they always gave me Australia. But everybody cheered, yeah, go get those rich people. What was in it? All electrical products. Cell phone, refrigerators. Basically, it turned into the definition of a luxury is anything besides a tent in the middle of a field. That's basically it. But this is what they always do. So with this digital currency, you can see it was the Bank of England that came out and said, oh, well, a mother should be able to prevent her child from buying a chocolate bar for lunch. And okay, fine. If a mother can do that, then what can they do? And so they have all these controls built in. Basically, what they're looking at is being able to track absolutely everything. If I give you $100 today, they don't know where I got it from. But if I give you 100 Bitcoin, they know who I got it from and everybody down the line. This is not freedom. Okay. And so I can tell you, I'm not sure if it's out in the press to any extent, but the IMF has already created their digital currency. And what they're planning on doing is that the IMF will replace the dollar. And the UN will appear to be the peacemaker and finally elevate itself to a world government. That's what they want. The whole climate change, the excuse is, oh, well, one government can't prevent climate change. It's going to take centralized control. Same thing with pandemics. We will decide when everybody's locked down, not individual, mayors, governors, and presidents. It's every agency you ever dealt with, and no matter what country. When you give anybody in government power, they always want more. Look at NATO. NATO was supposed to protect Europe against communism. Well, communism fell. Why, at that point, was NATO not defunded? So in order to keep their funding, because they're afraid that the climate change, money was being diverted from them to climate change. So all of a sudden, oh, Russia wants to conquer all of Europe. that was the days of the Soviet Union. The Russian people no more want to come in to occupy Europe than the American people want to go to Russia or anything, or China, whatever. The average person just wants to take care of their family and get along with life. It's always the elites that start these wars and things of that nature. So, I mean, it's, should just look at this when Goring testified at Nuremberg. They said, oh, gee, he says, oh, it's always easy to drag the people in. Just tell them they're going to be attacked or whatever. He says, no schmuck. And that's what he called them. He says, what benefit does going to war do a schmuck have? He's lucky if he comes back in one piece. What do you gain out of it? Nothing. We had 2 employees in Ukraine, one in Donetsk and one in Kiev. They're both in Berlin. I mean, this is not for Ukraine. You did all this for what? For Donbass, which has always been Russian. Russians have lived there for hundreds of years. This is what you end up with. It's just, some people have just hatreds that they will never forget. I can tell you in Kiev, you better not even bring a bottle of Russian vodka to dinner. It's an insult. It's just the way it is. I was in Yugoslavia when, dealing with the government back then. And they said, oh, you know what they did to us? They killed 600 of us and threw us in a common grave. And I thought I missed something on the news. I said, oh my God, really? I said, when did that happen? Oh, about 700 years ago. Oh, yes, that one. Okay. The memories go back centuries. And trust me, if a French girl decided to bring home a German boyfriend, the father's going to say, you do know what they did to us. That's just the way it is. You go to England and they still call a Catholic a pape, all right, over the Civil War, and that was in the 1650s. Things just, forever. I mean, that's why, you had the neocons like Bill Kristol advocating removing Saddam Hussein and Assad and Gaddafi, and this will bring peace to the Middle East. No way. I mean, you took out Saddam and ended up in with ISIS. And, you have Iran, which is Shiite, which believes the church should run the state. And you have Saudi Arabia, which is Sunni, which is a kingdom. I mean, that's why they hate each other. You're not going to solve these problems. It's like the Protestants versus the Catholics in Ireland. I mean, it's always going to be there.
Yeah, but isn't aren't Iran and Saudi making amends with the BRICS alliance?
They're on the economic side, okay, but when it comes down to religion, Iran believes that there shouldn't be any kings, and that's why you saw Saudi Arabia saying that they were actually talking to Israel, and Iran was like, "Oh, wait a minute," You just have a religious differences in the Middle East that are not going to be papered over.
What do you see transpiring with this future Iran missiles or future Iran attack on Israel? We haven't really seen an uptick in the price of oil. Why do you think that is? Why do you think the oil market hasn't really priced in anything substantial?
Most of them will think that it's basically just going to blow over one way or another. I think they wait for actually something, but I can tell you, because we have offices in Dubai, and basically what's happening in the Middle East is that most of the Arab states are on Russia's side because they feel that Israel is a protectorate of the United States. So that's the real core sentiment there, and so that's why Saudi Arabia was starting to lean a little bit more towards Iran. there's just an underbelly to this whole thing, and as they attack, as the neocons have attacked Iran, and Iran turns to Russia, and then Russia basically is being attacked in Ukraine. So, as I said, the neocons there in Russia, they know this is a war with the United States and NATO. They know it, and they've been, screaming at Putin from day one. And Putin did not want to invade Ukraine. That's why he only called it a special operation, went into the Donbass. All right. The neocons there say he should have gone into Ukraine, done to them what the U.S. did to Iraq, and this thing would have been over in 6 weeks. So that's the criticism he gets. And, God help us if he goes, because those neocons, they hate Americans just as much as our neocons hate them. And then it's probably full on,
Is Medvedev one of those neocons? Because he talks a lot. He talks a lot of smack on Telegram.
Yeah, look, he understands this, and Putin has made many overtures towards peace, many, and nobody wants peace. There was a peace agreement that was virtually almost signed. And then Boris Johnson hopped on a plane, went over there and told Zelensky not to sign anything. That made the Ukrainian press. So I can tell you that the view in Ukraine, once that happened, a lot of people began to see that Ukraine's not in control of anything. Their own people can't have peace unless it's approved by Washington. And I mean, it's a shame, but they've just been using Ukraine as the vanguard. That's it. Nobody really cares about Ukrainians. After Boris Johnson killed that peace deal, over 500,000 have been killed. I mean, he could take a bath in the blood that he's caused. And I can tell you also from sources there, Zelensky has a high-profile Ukrainian bodyguard, but the real bodyguards are American. He doesn't even trust Ukrainians. I can tell you what some of the comments I've heard from them is that if he was on fire, they wouldn't urinate on him until he was dead. They feel that he's like a traitor, that he just takes orders from the West, and he's not. That Ukraine is not in control of its own destiny. That's the biggest complaint that I hear.
Are you in the market for gold and silver? Then if so, please consider Miles Franklin. They are my gold and silver dealer of choice. So not only do they have super competitive prices that you're going to have a really hard time finding elsewhere, but then they also have top-notch customer support. I know Andy Schechtman, the owner of Miles Franklin, top-notch guy. I wouldn't be recommending them to you if I didn't have faith in their product. What you really want to do, however, you want to email them at info@milesfranklin.com, and you want to say that Capital Cosm sent me in the description line, because when you do that, you can get access to their special pricing sheet. You want to get that special pricing sheet because you're going to get special prices that you won't find on the website itself. So email them at info@milesfranklin.com. Tell them that Capital Cosm sent you, and you won't be heckled with spam emails, etc. There's no commitment necessary. I promise you that. And with that said, I will let you get back to the video. How much more runway does the Ukraine-Russia war still have? It looks like they're kind of wrapping things up. You're starting to hear more allusions to peace talks between, even from Ukraine. So is the war coming to a close, do you think?
Yes, that's mostly because of Trump. Trump is basically said that he would shut down the war before he even took office. But so what they're really looking, if Trump gets in, he's anti-war. So is RFK. And that's why they don't like either one of them. I can tell you, I was down working in Washington back when Reagan was elected. And they said, oh my God, they were all upset. I said, what's the problem? Oh, you don't understand. I said, well, explain it to me. What's the problem? Oh, he's a governor. We're going to have to train him. They don't like anybody from outside. That's why they don't like Trump, and they also don't like RFK. All right. When Trump was in before, they stuck in Pence. And Harris is stuck in with Biden. Always somebody from Washington. They put on a good show, Republican versus Democrat, on certain things. But when it comes to draining the swamp or putting up money for one thing or another, they always tend to end up agreeing on the same thing. People don't realize how bad the politics has become. I can run for Congress. I can tell you whatever you want to hear. I'll save the whales. I'll do this. I'll do that. Whatever you want. And I get elected. I then go down and there's a meeting on the first day. All right. You're then brought in. Congratulations. Glad you're here. Now here is how it works. You will vote as we tell you. So just look at the votes. You'll see both sides. They're down party lines. So I can be for something completely different. It doesn't matter. If I want to be on a committee, I have to play ball. And that's when the Tea Party had got in years ago. There were a little over 80 of them, and they refused. And John Bonner, who was the head of the Republicans, retaliated. He started removing anybody that supported him from any chairmanship of any financial committee. This is how corrupt it is in Washington. You do what I tell you or else. You have no power. You cannot make a motion on the floor. It has to come through a committee. So they've done everything to silence any individual. And this is both sides. It's not, Republican or Democrat. This is just the way Washington works. And you have the same nonsense in Parliament. I mean, I've been over to Brussels, and I went when they were first starting, and there was a queue alongside me, and people going in, swiping their card, turning around and leave. I said, what's going on here? They said, oh, they get an extra 200 euros for showing up. So they go in, they swipe their cards, so they get the extra 200 euros, turn around and leave. I mean, you're giving them a couple 100,000, and they don't even have to show up. But then we give you some extra money if you do show up. I mean, and this is the way governments are run. Most of the decisions are made in the back rooms. It's not the people you actually elect. Often they are made by the unelected people, which is why a lot of people start calling it the bureaucracy, which is the deep state.
Who are you projecting out to take the nod in the elections now? Trump was leading ahead of Biden by quite a bit, but now it seems like it's narrowed down now that Kamala's in the race. Where do you see the race going? What does Socrates project?
It still projects that Trump should win. And look, the polls are easily manipulated. Back in 2016, all the polls said Hillary was going to win. And our computer said no, Trump would win. We were the only one. Computer was right. Brexit in Britain, same thing. Every poll said Brexit was going to lose. Our computer said would win. In fact, Nigel Farage came down to our 2019 Rome conference, and he said, of course I'm here. He's the only one that said we were going to win. And he called us the alternative to Davos. So people will vote based upon the economics, and also what we're seeing is this trend on a global scale. All right, and it's not left or right or anything like that. Just look at every place. England flips to to Labour. France, the same thing. In the EU, it went to the right. It's more or less whoever's in power is being thrown out. So it's not a Democrat, Republican philosophy type thing. It's just people are fed up everywhere you go. And in Asia, I hear the same thing. It's maybe frustration from the economy that is on a global problem. Our computer is projecting that we're into a recession into 2028. Combined with war, and it doesn't matter who's there. I don't care, if Trump's there or Harris. But they just formed a little group called the Republicans for Harris. And look at the people that are on it. They're all neocons. And I know these people. Bill Kristol, for example, was chief of staff in the White House for Dan Quayle in a Republican administration. And now he's basically over cheering, all the Democrats. He raised money to try to defeat Trump before. He only wants war. And Trump was not in favor of war, so therefore he's against Trump. He had a magazine called the Standard, and he turned it into an anti-Trump thing. He lost all his supporters, and the magazine failed. I've met many heads of state, and I did go down to dinner at Mar-a-Lago in March of 2020 when Trump was still president. And in all honesty, it was the first time a head of state really did impress me. And what it was, he said he wanted to pull the troops out of Afghanistan. But he said he was sick and tired of writing letters to their parents saying, your son died for God and country. And he said, what are we doing there? They've been fighting over borders for 1,000 years. What difference are we going to make? I knew Maggie Thatcher and the Falklands War and all that. I never heard any head of state ever once speak any remorse about the people that actually died on the battlefield. You had McNamara, who was the neocon that took us into Vietnam. You can look on YouTube. He did a video before he died, and he wrote a book. And he said we were wrong. We thought Russia was involved. They were not. It was just a civil war. And he said he was doing that because we have to learn from our mistakes. And 58,000 Americans died because they were wrong. And how many families were destroyed over that, or children grew up without a parent? And how many millions of Vietnamese were killed? Why? All because they thought Russia was involved? When you have these neocons and they've just been, perhaps terrorized when they were kids, and when we all had to hide underneath our desks for the radar, the sirens are blaring and stuff, and they came out of it and I got to get them, so one way or another, I guess. I don't know.
Don't they come from the Trotskyite school? Isn't that their origin?
Maybe. I just think that when Khrushchev came out and said, we're going to bury you, that got them all riled up. And because it was an economic philosophy against capitalism. And that's what it was, almost like a religious type thing. So communism fell, and I honestly think these people, as I said, when I was down there with Reagan, and Reagan wanted to meet with Gorbachev, I know what they told him. You can never trust a Russian. And he went anyhow. If he did not go, the Berlin Wall would never have fallen. All right, but they turn their hatred of communism, I think, into racism practically. And all I can say is that I think they're just mad that communism fell by itself and they didn't get to shoot anybody. you know, and I think even Ron Paul said these people have been waging wars for nearly 50 years, and they never won a single one of them yet.
Yeah. If we do get a second Trump presidency, he does seem dovish on the Ukraine front. But what about the South China Sea front as well as the Iran front? How does he kind of stack up in your eyes on those two theaters of war?
He's basically against war. And I have spoken to RFK's people and him. They are also against war. Needless to say, my concern is that I know these people. There's too much on the table for them. They are so close to their ultimate power, which is, taking down Russia and China. They're not going to walk away quietly. The assassination attempt on Trump is just right out of their playbook. I mean, now you're finding, the Secret Service wasn't even at meetings in advance. It basically it was what we call stand down. Oh, I didn't do it, but I didn't do anything to prevent it. Basically even sharpshooters have been denied Trump for over 2 years. They suddenly showed up at that event. Why? Believe me, you can't trust anybody in government. They will never, ever, ever tell you the truth. And I get called in because I understand the wordsmithing. That's it. I was advising Margaret Thatcher, and they staged a coup to get rid of her because they wanted to take the pound into the euro. And they stuck it in the ERM. That's when Soros started attacking because they overvalued it. And I told them, they called me, and I said, look, you have to devalue the pound. Oh, we can't do that because John Major ran on election promising not to devalue the pound. So I thought about it. I wrote a little paragraph, gave it to him. I said, here, have him say this. I'm going to allow the pound to float to seek its own level. Oh, brilliant. He didn't do it. The market did it. All right. But somebody's got to do it. It's wordsmithing. He couldn't say, I'm devaluing, because now he's overruling himself. Oh, the market did it, not me. How about that? This is what I talk about. I mean, I get called in governance all this. I know the game. I understand the game. And it's, unfortunately, this is the way it really is. They will never, ever admit any mistake. COVID, whatever. They're just not going to. In Germany, there have been papers leaked that they knew lockdowns didn't work. They still did them. I was given the code by Britain where the Ferguson, is the guy that with a computer program that justified the lockdowns. I was handed the code to please analyze it for Parliament. I did. I wrote it. It's on my blog. When I wrote, I couldn't believe it. It was like a 1970s children's game, and I said, "This is like Sim City." You start with an assumption, and their assumption was 20% of the people were going to die. So if you start with that assumption, guess what? Oh, the only way to stop it's a lockdown. And then they go, oh, well, I guess we were wrong on our assumption. Just a little bit, but you destroyed the world. I mean, this is the problem. That was not a program that actually forecast anything. It was just, and the instructions, I looked at it, I swear to God, it said run it 20, 25 times, then take the average. This is what you do, and this is what COVID was based on. They locked the whole world down on this. pathetic program that I think anybody would have. It was maybe the first attempt at writing a program if you ever went to programming school. It was that unsophisticated.
Yeah, it sounds like something I may have done in high school or something, but
Exactly. It just, it was pathetic. It was just a stochastic. That was it.
wow. Well, you did mention a coalescing of a world government, potentially in 2032, but we do see a splintering off of an alternative world order as well, with the BRICS countries and so forth. Are we, would that world government be at the helm of these BRICS nations, or is that just simply like a pipe dream of the Western coalition? Is that world government scenario kind of like what they're aiming towards, but will we see a multipolar world or not? Like, is it going to be unipolar? Is it going to be multipolar? What do you see?
Yeah, no, the whole thing is going to collapse, basically. I don't see them achieving their one world government. There is a tape on my site of the former president of Holland standing in Parliament alongside Merkel. And that's what he said. The whole purpose of the EU, one government will prevent European war. And I can tell you, you're more likely to get into civil war because you can't, dictate cultures and things of that from a centralized power. This dream and the whole idea of the IMF coming up with a currency is to try and bring the world BRICS back in and say, see, come to us and we'll be able to, merge the left and the right of the world and achieve peace. And I just don't see that happening. We're in what our computer is showing, and we put in. It goes back thousands of years of data that we've accumulated, and we're at a stage right now where we're in these republic forms of government, and they are the world's worst. When Caesar crossed the Rubicon, all right, he didn't have to fight to get to Rome. Every city opened their gates and cheered. It was the Senate that fled to Asia. All right, fine. Cicero was one of the corrupt oligarchs. So we were, Caesar's this dictator, whatever. Well, then why did you flee? All right. Why did the people not support you if this idea of a republic was so great? It's the most corrupt form of government because every individual is up for sale. Even a monarchy or a dictatorship, you can't bribe, all right? So when Caesar crossed the Rubicon, it was a major debt crisis at that time. It was out of control. Back then, let's say you bought a house for $100,000 and real estate collapsed, it's only worth $50,000. You couldn't just walk away. The guy that lent you the money says, all right, fine, now the house is only $50,000, you still owe me $50,000. All right, and if you couldn't pay, they took your children and sold them into slavery. It was a bit different type of situation back then, all right? Why do we have Julius Caesar basically revised the calendar, the Julian calendar? Why? Because Rome was using the moon calendar. They knew it was out of whack with the sun. And the high priest had the discretion to put in the leap days. So if they didn't want to go to an election, they just bribed him. So when Caesar crossed the Rubicon, it was January 10th. It should have been winter, but it was summer. So Caesar basically revised the calendar, took out the discretion, all right, and said, this is it, it's fixed, all right? Is that a dictator, or is it somebody actually draining the swamp? So that's really what happened. And when we overthrew monarchy, unfortunately, the decline and fall of the Roman Empire was just written by Gibbon in 1776, and everybody was into this Roman thing at the time, and they thought Cicero was true. but he was the ancient fake news. All right. And so we ended up with a republic. There was a woman that even asked Ben Franklin when he was coming out of the convention, what kind of a government do we have? And he said, a republic if you can keep it. All right. It is historically, the most corrupt form of government, period. And so this is what's collapsing. Just as I said, I can run for Congress and say, whatever you want to hear. I'll save the whales, whatever. I get there and then I have to vote according to what I'm told. It's, we don't have democracy in this country. That's another piece of propaganda. Democracy, we should vote. Do we go to war with Russia? Yes or no? We don't get that right. And these political things, when communism fell in 1989, everyone, Tiananmen Square goes, the Berlin Wall falls about 6 months later, and they said, oh, it's the communications. No, it's not. Rome overthrew its kings in 509 BC, started its republic. Within 6 months, guess what? Athens overthrows its tyrants and democracy's born. These things have always swept around like a contagion. America has its revolution. All right, guess what? Washington sworn in 1789. France goes, that's a good idea, and they have their revolution. It's more or less not how fast the information gets there. It's how long does it take to filter through society. When you get to about maybe 40%, then you get the political change. We're in that process now. It's filtering through. I believe COVID began it, with a lot of people starting to question whether or not it was fake, real, whatever. And I think that began the questioning of the government. If you look at the current polls published by Gallup poll on confidence, Congress is at the very bottom, at 7 or 8%. I think nightly news is just above it. People have just lost confidence in government. Nobody trusts anything they say anymore. So this comes to a head. And there'll be some sort of spark, maybe war, whatever it is. But something will then get everybody to wake up, and then we get a new form of government. And I don't think it's going to be this one world government. I'm hoping this time we go more towards a democracy, where we actually get the right to vote. Back in my day when everybody was in Vietnam, you were 18, you couldn't drink, and you couldn't vote, but you're old enough to die and show up and get deported over to there. That's not democracy. That's a dictatorship. That was what a lot of the protests were about. You were too young to even have a drink, but you could shoot somebody. That's okay. Just these hypocritical type philosophies, and all the time you hear, Democrat. We're a democratic country. No, we're not. We have no right to vote on anything. We vote for basically a representative only, and then they go down and they do whatever they're told to. You got to vote this way or the other way. That's not a democracy. So hopefully we get to that.
Yeah, well, let's leave it on that peachy note, Martin. It's been a pleasure having you on. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we wrap things up?
No, I think we covered pretty much everything. I think, be mindful of what we're really looking for, wars and things of that nature. I am afraid that the neocons are very concerned about Trump winning, so they may attempt Plan B to try and start some sort of an event to trap him into it, that in case he wins. They're just not going to let it go.
Yeah. Well, where can people find you, Martin?
ArmstrongEconomics.com. It's open. It's free. You don't have to register. No, we don't sell ads. It's for a public service.
Excellent. We'll have that link down below, just for your convenience, guys. Be sure to check it out. And with that said, give us a like if you enjoyed this video. Type "Go Martin Go" in the comments if you agree with Martin Armstrong, and if you disagreed, let me know. Let me know what you disagreed on, and really interested to get your take. And with that said, you guys, I will see you in the next episode. Bye, y'all.